Good evening, everybody. Nice to have you join us. I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to having a chance to talk to everybody about the political situation as we start into the 2020 election cycle and some policy questions. I understand from Anna Schumann, who's here helping out as always, our communications director, and Rowan Humphreys, as well with her, that we've had a lot of questions submitted in advance, as well as some that were coming in this afternoon, a variation of policy questions, and a lot of people asking about the political landscape. So you know that the council does the range of things. We do the policy, we do education, we do analysis, and we also do the politics of it, go out and respond to people who want our endorsement as an organization. We have a board of former elected officials at the federal level, military personnel, physicists and other scientists, others through walks of life on that who are really engaged in this issue and knowledgeable about it. We take questionnaires to the candidates, give them an opportunity to answer questions about our issues. Those are reviewed, and then certain candidates are invited to come in and have an interview with a subset of our board, full board membership, and then a recommendation is made to the board to either endorse or not endorse. For those that we do endorse, we're happy to work with their staffs during the campaign, add advice and counsel on issues as they arise if requested. We're also able to support them in their efforts in terms of raising the resources to get elected. Many of you contribute to their campaigns by making a check to the candidate payable and sent in through our offices, so those candidates know that there are a number of people in the community who believe strongly in those issues and that they're getting support from them. That helps us on the other end, of course, that after the campaign is over and the elections have been won, those candidates that we endorsed always end up running into us in one place or another, either a visit to their office or somewhere where we can engage in a conversation about these policies as they're being made into legislation. And we remind them that a number of people that are very interested in these issues worked with them during the campaign, helped them during the campaign, and expect them to live up to their commitments and the positions they took during the campaign. And we've had significant success this year alone with the House Armed Services Committee having as many as 9 of people that we endorsed on it. And it's the first time, I think, that you've seen the majority in the House of Representatives making up that Armed Services Committee, passing some significant legislation having to do with the defense budget, having to do with their opposition to any new nuclear weapons that this administration wanted in terms of lower yield weapons that the administration thought might be more usable, that many other people thought were, of course, dangerous and destabilizing. It still remains a question as to how those positions taken by the House will fare in the Senate. We do not have the same majority, progressive majority in the Senate. Of course, Mitch McConnell and his folks over there are trying to do everything they can do to give the administration everything that they wanted. And that conference bill, the one that would iron out the differences between the House version of the defense bill and the Senate version, is still in progress. Word is that maybe in a week or two they'll have some solution as to what is coming out of that, but we won't know until then. But again, we're happy about the way that the election turned out in the House, that we really went to a progressive majority on national security and nuclear weapons policy. We endorsed some 50 candidates overall. And I think there were, I'm looking here, 15 Senate races and 35 House races. Went all but one of the Senate races. We lost one in Texas, as you know, Beto O'Rourke, who we thought would have been much better on his positions than Ted Cruz, who we adamantly disagree with on many of the positions he takes with regard to the issues on that. In the House, we won about 80% of those races as well, which has helped give us the majority of people who are taking some great stands on that. So we're pleased with that. We need, in the next race in 2020, if we're going to change the dynamic in the Senate, we need to pick up 3 seats if everybody else stays in place. And if not, if we have a problem with a race, say Doug Jones down in Alabama or something like that, then of course we'll need to pick up more. If the Democrats get the majority back, then 3 will be enough, plus the vice president's vote to break a tie. If they don't get the majority back, then 4 seats will be needed for them to have a majority on that. So there's work to be done, but there are some races that we think can be won. We think that Mark Kelly in Arizona, for instance, stands a very good chance of unseating McSally on that, and these issues should play prominently in that race. We think in Maine that Susan Collins is susceptible to getting beat by Sarah Gideon, who we've endorsed as a candidate coming in. She seems to be very, very good on our issues, seems to be a good leader. She's been the Senate president up there for some time, very popular. She's done a great job in raising resources for her campaign, and it appears to be, for all intents and purposes, an excellent campaigner as well. In Colorado, Hickenlooper, who was the governor, as you know, then a presidential candidate, now back in the Senate race there, shows signs of being very strong against Gardner. So those are three races that we feel are looking good. In North Carolina, Tom Tillis, the incumbent Republican, seems to be unpopular, at least at the moment out there, having a lot of difficulties. There's some strong candidates in the primary that could take him out. The leading one, from our understanding right now, is Cal Cunningham, who has a good, strong following, has raised a significant amount of money, more than Tillis did, and again is good on our issues on that. In Kentucky, there's a long shot. Taking out Mitch McConnell, of course, would be a joyous occasion for most of us, because something might actually get done in the Senate instead of obfuscation and interference. But that's a tough race and a tough state on that. And even though the governorship just went to a Democrat on that, there's some speculation that it's as much because the Republican incumbent was not liked by many people as anything else. But it's there. We have a strong candidate in Amy McGrath. She's doing a great job of raising the resources. She's been a candidate before in the House race in 2018, you remember, ran a good race there, it was close. But the dynamic seems to have been shifted. We've seen Democrats picking up statewide seats in formerly red states. So this could play into that race as well. We're watching it closely and looking at that. In Georgia, there will be 2 seats open. And John Ossoff, who ran a special in a House race a couple of years back and just barely lost in a really red district, is in that race as well. So there are opportunities out there. There are some places where we have to make sure that current candidates that are good on our issues remain strong. Tina Smith up in Minnesota, Mark Peters in Michigan. Those are seats that there have been a real big contest of strong candidates against them. We feel that they're strong and can win, and we're certainly trying to make that happen with your help. So all of this is going on the political end of things. We can have some questions on that, Anna, later if people want to talk about it some more. And we're happy to talk to anybody that wants to call or email or get in touch with us any way you can about those political issues at any time. Our political director, Jeff Wilson, our senior fellow, John Isaacs, Anna Rowe, and I, anybody else here actually can address those questions with you, and happy to talk to you about them at any time. We anticipate endorsing quite a few candidates by the end of this year. Our full board has its meeting in the middle of December, and they'll be endorsing more candidates, and then as others get into the race and primaries conclude, there'll be others going forward. So we'll probably end up endorsing about the same number of House and Senate candidates that we did in the last election. We'll be looking to you for help in trying to push them over the finish line and hopefully be able to carry forward our policies in a big, important way on that, because you know how serious these issues are. And speaking of the policies, Anna, I'm happy to take any questions that we've either had or that are coming in on that, if you like, and answer as best we can.
Okay, great. So we actually have 2 questions that just came in about nuclear weapons and climate change. So Alice from Washington, D.C. and Kat from Edwards, Colorado want to know if the message that nuclear war is closely linked to climate change getting any traction. Are young people seeing the connection between these 2 existential threats to life on this planet? And how can we create a grassroots movement with climate crisis to address both existential crises at the same time?
I'll tell you, good thoughts, both of them put together. I'm sure that they both have most of that question on their own question on that. It's a great question. It's a difficult area because that needs to be done. We need to connect the 15 to 35-year-old generations as well as everybody else into this issue. They are very involved in climate change and environmental issues as well as social justice and health care, but there hasn't been that much movement in the nuclear security area on that, for the reason that most of society thought we were on a trajectory of having issues solved. Since President Reagan, both Democratic presidents and Republican presidents have been talking about disarmament, lowering the number of nukes in the world, trying to make the situation safer and less risky, and then the Trump administration came in and turned that upside down. So fortunately, we're not at the height of alarm that we were back when people were ducking and covering, and we don't want it to get to that point, but we do need to have people understand that this is still a serious existential issue. And we always tell people, you know, there's pandemic, and there's climate change, and there's nuclear issues on that are existential. In reality, could be serious complications, not just for a country or a person, but for the planet on that. But of those 3, it's the nuclear question that really can get you in about 30 minutes. If there's a mistake or a miscalculation, if there were to be a major conflict on a nuclear level, then certainly this would be the end of the world as we know it. So it's as I said, hopefully not as imminent as people believe, but there's plenty of reason out there to think that it's ripe for mistake and miscalculation. We would hope that there aren't any leaders in the world out there right now that would start a nuclear war. I mean, most people believe that even in North Korea or a country where people are concerned, that the leader there is rational and wants to preserve his own position enough that he wouldn't start a war knowing that the answer would be to wipe out his country. But the problem is there an issue with miscalculation or misperception or mistake where somebody misreads the intentions of somebody else, or somebody gets a technology glitch that leads them to believe that something has happened that they should be defensive about, and it sets things off. So we need people to get engaged in this. Interestingly enough, that 15 to 35-year-old group of people who are really the people of possible. I mean, they have taken on some issues that are otherwise existential, whether it's gun violence prevention, whether it's domestic abuse, whether it's social justice, whether it's health care, whether it's climate change and the environment. Those are intractable problems in a large sense for other generations, but this 15 to 35-year-old group has come out and said, no, it's possible, we're Generation Possible, and we're working on it, we're going to change and make this planet more livable now. The same holds true, and we've got to convince them the same holds true. We need their energy, their innovation, their sense of justice on issues having to do with nuclear matters. And that's both because of the issue themselves, that we need to decrease the risk, and there are things that people can do to make sure that that's done, not the least of which is taking out of the hands of a single individual, like a president, the ability to start a nuclear war even if nobody's attacking us. And that's certainly, there's no justice in that, and it's not very democratic to allow one person to be able to start a situation that impedes everybody's progress going forward. There are other issues within the nuclear security area that are similar to that, so we need people to get engaged. And there is that connection between the environment. Of course, if a nuclear explosion ever happened anywhere, it's going to affect the environment in that region, and if enough nuclear explosions happen, it's going to affect the environment worldwide. The nuclear winter issue, where enough particles and materials are put into the atmosphere so that they block the sun, in a conflict, say, between India and Pakistan, will certainly have an effect on a large swath of area in that area. If it happened between Russia and the United States, of course, it would be the world. That would be an issue on that. But even in the process of testing, which we hope people don't return to, but the United States still has not signed the test ban treaty, and the younger generation as well as others could be putting pressure on members of Congress and the Senate to pass that and send it to the President for him to sign. And that would be a big move, because we found out that when people are testing, they're not testing in cities and wealthy areas, they're testing in rural in areas where people might be poorer financially. And they're leaving really lasting problems of health, poison in the water, and issues that are related to the environment and to people's health on that. So we've got to make that connection. We've got to make a better job about the way we talk about it, but we have to make sure that people know there is something that can be done. It is possible to make things safer and less risky, and we need to engage and address those people in it. And so the fight is going on. We're having some successes, but we need to have a lot more. We need to get that energy and that communication going, particularly on the digital sphere, where a way that so many people communicate today, we need that to be part of the conversation. And so we're looking forward to keep working in that area. Anna?
Okay, so we actually have 3 people from New York who are curious about the cost of nuclear modernization. I'm going to try to combine these all into one question.
Good luck with the technical part of that.
Modernization of the U.S. nuclear arsenal is costing an estimated $100,000 per minute.
$100,000 per minute, that's about right. Yeah.
The Pentagon's failed audit showed DoD spending reports to Congress are fraudulent. Basically, how do we bring this issue of concern up to our elected officials? How do we get them to hold the appropriations process accountable? How do we keep from spending this ridiculous money?
Again, these are great questions, and you did a pretty good job of synthesizing the two of them on that. Look, the estimates our questions obviously no. They seem to be pretty learned on the subject. There's estimates that the so-called modernization of the nuclear arsenal is going to cost some $1.7 trillion when you include an interest over the next 30 years to do it. But I think it's important to make a distinction between efforts to keep our arsenal safe and secure and effective for those people that believe in deterrence and believe that the primary reason that you have a nuclear arsenal is so that others won't attack you with nuclear weapons. If that's your purpose, then you have to look at the size. Is it really necessary that we have as many weapons as we have? Is it necessary that we have all 3 legs of the so-called triad, the land-based missiles, the sea-based missiles, and the air on that. We have to look at the idea of, are we just making sure that they are secure and that the systems run well if they were ever needed to be used, they'll be effective, and that they're safe now, that they won't be the result of any miscalculation or mistake or accident on that. And so that's one modernization aspect that I think most people think ought to be pursued. As long as you have nuclear weapons and you do believe in a deterrence, in that case, then that's what you need to do. But you don't need is to build newer, faster, more powerful, more accurate, and more different types of bombs on that, and missiles and things of that nature, because that's going to be destabilizing. All that does is lead to other countries, Russia or others, to think, well, my God, if they're going to do all that, they must be doing it because they're thinking of attacking us first. And their response to that, of course, is to escalate and get back into an arms race and put them in a position of maybe they, at a first signal or miscalculation, would be starting something on that. So that's the problem. Modernization and the idea of making it bigger, faster, bolder, more powerful, and destabilizing is not a good thing. It's far more expensive than what is needed to make sure that what we have is a deterrent that's effective and safe and secure. And so you can save a lot of money by doing it just in the idea of keeping it safe, secure, and effective. And you could stop the destabilization area, get us back to negotiations and diplomatic discussions. What's really missing in the whole conversation is, why are we not engaging with other countries, and why are they not engaging with us? Why aren't we having strategic stability discussions with Russia and China and others? Why aren't we trying to negotiate a solution to some of the disagreements we have? And right now we have no conversations going. It's not easy. It's not going to happen overnight. But what Ronald Reagan learned is that you have to start the conversation. And it's going to take time. But we built up a system of treaties and agreements that have lowered the number of nuclear weapons in the world from 70,000 plus down to about 14,000. And we have made it less of a risk. And we have made it somewhat more secure and stable on that. But now we're moving away from that. This idea that they're going to modernize in the bad sense of growing the number of weapons and their accuracy and power, things of that nature, is causing an arms race again and putting us back on that trajectory that we thought we had under wraps since Ronald Reagan was involved. So we need to get back where we need on the right track on that and move from there. Anna.
Okay, great. I'm just going to make one ask of our people on the phone real quickly. If you guys wouldn't mind muting yourselves. Normally we have a program that can do that for us, but we seem to be having a little bit of difficulty. Thank you so much. Okay, and now a question from Marilyn in Peterborough, and I'm really sorry if I butchered that, Peterborough, New Hampshire. Are there serious actions on dismantling nuclear weapons, and if so, do they plan on independent checking?
That's interesting on that. Back in the early days of President Obama's administration, they sort of expedited the dismantlement of those weapons that were no longer going to be used. You remember that under the New START agreement in 2010, President Medvedev in Russia and President Obama had come to an agreement to lower the number of deployed active nuclear weapons to 1,550, and the missile systems that could actually throw them or activate them to 800 deployed and active. And others were set aside in storage and then to be deactivated and removed. So President Obama, funded and expedited that process to do that, because the more of them that you do deactivate, of course, the safer the world becomes. And both countries were moving in that direction, and there was some verification and some inspection on that. Obviously, we can always improve the verification inspection, but it was pretty open and transparent at that stage. And then the Trump administration has come in and they've slowed that process. And so I think that what we need to do is talk to our members of Congress, both in the House and the Senate, and people, if you know anybody in the administration or whatever like that, and say that they've got to put pressure on the White House to begin to ramp up that program again and get to deactivate as many as possible of those that are not in a deployed situation. And that's where people come in. Again, I say the art of the possible that the 15 to 35-year-old generation seems to get on every issue and needs to help us with on this one, is that's one of the things that people can do. We can ask those questions of why isn't this happening at this expedited pace that it had in the last administration. There's no good reason for it not to happen, and our members of Congress have to get engaged. They have to provide the funding so that it can be done by the administration, and then they have to provide the pressure to make sure that it is done. Same thing with respect to returning to the table and having negotiations and transparent discussions. Congress should be having hearings, and they should be making clear to the administration that they expect this to happen and reflecting that in their budgets.
Okay, great. So we have just a few minutes left. I'm going to hop around a little bit. All right, Brian from San Francisco wants to know, do you think the recent Russian doomsday weapons are real weapon systems that Putin wants to deploy, or are they some sort of negotiation tactic or leverage?
Yes. No, there's a mix. It's a good question on that. But so look, I remember the speech that you must be referring to that Putin made, and he had all these scary different weapons that he was talking about on that. Some of them are things that will probably never get off the drawing board. One of them got off the drawing board apparently long enough to explode. That was the so-called Skyfall program. But we should remember that back in the 50s, the United States had a similar cruise missile program called the Pluto Project, or Project Pluto, that we never got off the drawing board because we thought it was totally unworkable, unpractical, too expensive, and not a useful strategic weapon to have. And now, whether Russia ever gets to the point that they stop, especially after the explosion, to decide the same thing and move on, or not, it's unknown. Some of the systems that they're developing are basically just new versions of nuclear weapons, ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, or others that are real, and that they're building those. Shouldn't be building them, but building them as part of this arms race because nobody's having strategic discussions and nobody's getting back into trying to engage on restrictions on that. And some of them are a little bit more troublesome on that, but they're really a variation of the same threat as a nuclear bomb that comes in by air or sea or intercontinental ballistic missile on that. They're just another way of causing a problem, but the resolution for that is there are no defenses to any of these, as we found out with our own so-called missile defense program, which doesn't work, and as most physicists say won't work, is that the real solution is to get in and start engaging again, not pulling out of treaties that this administration has done, not pulling out of agreements, but engaging, trying to find good ways to verify, be transparent, be able to inspect, and put in place agreements that limit the number of nuclear weapons, limit the number of missiles and trajectories that can take those weapons anywhere, and try to get that pressure going down. Under our non-proliferation treaty obligations, we're supposed to be doing that anyway. And that helps keep other countries from proliferating and deciding that they want to get involved in having nuclear weapons. So right now that's a controversy because people don't see the Russia or the United States even working on that bilateral agreement that they have toward the goals they set for themselves. So mostly those weapons are, somewhat scary, but they're no real difference than a lot of other. In fact, some of them would be covered by the New START agreement extension. You were already familiar, obviously you asked that question, you're familiar with the New START agreement, which limited, as I mentioned a minute ago, the number of missiles and the number of nuclear weapons. That agreement is going to expire in February of 2021, and it can be extended for 5 years just by a signature of both presidents. Russia has indicated that they're willing to do that. The United States should do it. There's no real reason, although this administration seems to have a proclivity for backing out of agreements and has not indicated that they will yet extend it on that basis. But if they did extend it, some of those new weapons that Russia is doing would fall within those limits. So they'd actually be controlled and expected. One good reason to extend the agreement on that. So there's the answer to that is yes and yes, that some of them are of concern, but they can be limited through negotiation and the New START agreement if they're done. Some of them are sort of spookier in the sense of that, but they have not yet been brought into a point where we think that they can actually work. Some of them have actually blown up, as we saw in their earlier experiments. So the answer to all of these questions are, why aren't we engaging? And why aren't we trying to find a diplomatic solution to this? Why aren't we getting back into the mode of having verifiable agreements with people, mutual, verifiable ways to reduce the nuclear risk and eventually eliminating it, which is why the Council for a Livable World is here and why with your support we've had such success over the years, and now unfortunately we find ourselves having to re-engage at those heightened levels because we have an administration and several members of Congress, whether it's Ted Cruz or Tom Cotton or other people that just don't get it and seem to think that they're in that John Bolton camp where we can't have enough weapons and we can't do anything more than be bullies and threaten people with them, and they think that's the best way to security. Clearly, we disagree, and I think you disagree as well. So, Anna, are we taking more questions?
We have just a few more questions. Sarah, who submitted her question via Instagram, thank you, Sarah, wants to know if the START treaty is still being enacted.
Well, I assume you're talking about New START because that succeeded START. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, it's Everybody's complying with it at the present time. It provides incredible insight for the Russians into us and for us into the Russians, so that if we have military engagement on that, we understand where they're at, they know where we're at, and we can make sure that they're in compliance and they can do the same. It has the limitations on the number of deployed weapons at 1,550. It has limitations on the number of missiles, which is 800 deployed missiles on that basis. And that's in place, and it can be extended, as I mentioned, for 5 more years, and should be. And if it did, it would cover some of those new instruments that Brian was talking about. I think it was Brian from California was mentioning just a second ago on that. So our military tells us, interestingly enough, even though this administration seems to be hesitating and indicating that they might not want to extend it, our military has been adamant. Even military advisors in the administration and connected to this president, saying this is a treaty that's valuable to us. There's no upside to not extending it. There's plenty of upside to extending it. And it's important for us to do that. We'll never get the kind of insight that we have now into the system of verification and transparency.
Okay, Karen from Toledo, Ohio, wants to know which of the presidential candidates is strongest on nuclear arms control.
Interesting. So this is great paid advertising. We've started a new site.
NukeVote2020.org.
Right. Brain cramp on that. NukeVote2020.org. And all you have to do is go to that, and we asked every one of the candidates on the primaries, both Republican and Democrat, the questions we think are related to these issues, one of them being no first use, but a whole range of questions. We got answers from a number of them. The front runners all responded, with the exception of Mr. Buttigieg, who's refused to accept. So that's an issue, and I don't think they're happy with the fact that we put down that they denied to accept, except we had an engagement with them. We don't think any presidential candidate should be in this race without a willingness to tell the American people where they stand on nuclear weapons policy. And we may love a candidate to death, but it's not right unless they're going to answer these questions. So most of them have. Some of them are still in the process of preparing their answer. We'll put them up when they do. None of the Republicans have responded so far. We didn't expect the president to respond. I did have a conversation with Bill Weld, and he says he's going to respond. And we'll see about Mark Stanford and Jim Walsh on that, people that I serve with. But I reached out to them, and we'll see if they want to respond as well. But it's a good place for you to go and look and see where the candidates stand. Well, then you can judge for yourself who you think is best on these issues. We were happy that most of the Democratic respondents, at any rate, seem to all be of a notion of understanding that we need to get back to the diplomatic channel, that we need to lower the risk, that we need to have policies that move us in that direction. And I think that we'd be far more comfortable with that view of the world, and most of those people, all of those people, than we would be with the current administration's sort of view on that.
All right, let's see if we have time for 2 more questions. Mark from Boulder, Colorado wants to know, will we have any nuclear arms control treaties left by the end of the Trump presidency?
Well, the New START will still be in effect for at least about 5 days after he does, but it could be in effect for 5 years and 5 days if he extends it. So we're hoping that that's there, but that's a risk. And the question then becomes, if it's still in effect when the administration leaves, but they haven't extended it, what can you do in 5 days? Can you extend it? It's a similar situation what happened there, however, at the START agreement that preceded New START. That had actually expired at the change of administrations, and there was a negotiation that was able to happen that sort of brought us to a better point after that, and then to New START eventually on that. So it's not irreparable, but certainly more preferable to be able to extend that now and move forward on that. Otherwise, we have some problems. The Open Skies Treaty, which is another treaty that gives us great transparency and abilities to validate where the military situations of countries are. I think it's 34 countries are a participant in that. That's under threat by this administration, but there were hearings as recently as today on that. Bill Keating from Massachusetts was chairing the committee in the Foreign Relations Committee on that, and the hearings seemed to go well, that even members who we don't generally think would do anything except support the president seem to be sort of skeptical about the notion of why would you get out of this treaty. It's a good thing. It doesn't do anything bad to the United States. We may not need it in the sense of getting transparency because we have satellites that some other countries don't have, but a lot of our allies and friends rely on our technology and rely on the fact that we can go with them and work with them to get insight into what other countries are doing. And it really is an effort that lowers the risk again, lowers the temperature of people because they know more about other people's situation, they can do it. Other than that, there's a steady march for this administration to try to get out of just about every agreement that they think they can, and it's incumbent on all of us to contact our members of Congress and get them to push back on this notion to the extent that we can.
All right. If this is our last question, we might not be ending on such a happy note. Greg from Burlington, Vermont asks simply, are we going to go to war with Iran?
Well, I mean, nobody should want to, that's for sure on that. The answer we'd all love to have is no, there's no way that would happen, because it doesn't make any sense. The military solution does not exist to the differences that countries have with Iran, Iran has with other countries, primarily the United States. The joint action that we had, JCPOA, was a good solution. To the problem that we had. Was one of the most far-reaching nuclear agreements that has ever been reached, with incredible transparency in it, inspection rights, verification rights, stopped Iran from getting a nuclear capacity, for a long period of time, kept them under the agreement even beyond the length of the agreement itself. They had to meet and comply with terms and inspections from the IAEA, but the withdrawal of President Trump from that, of course, has raised the temperature there. His sanctions impositions, extreme pressure, have raised tensions even more, not to the fact where he's getting any results that he wanted from it. The Iranian people, although they're upset at recent rises in gas prices or whatever, don't seem to be nearing a situation where there's going to be any overthrow. Things are volatile always in Iran because of their political structure and their religious structure sort of always compete on that basis. But other than really having a harmful effect on the Iranian civil society, people who used to look favorably at the United States like that, and causing now tensions and sort of an adverse reaction from them, because they don't think that we can be relied upon to keep our agreement, and they think that this administration is just taking a gratuitous slap at them with these sanctions or whatever, making their lives more difficult. That's what's really happening, and it creates a situation here. So I don't think you're in a situation where either country would start a war on that, except by accident, by miscalculation, by some error or like that, and that's where the danger really lies, because there's no engagement going on, because the countries aren't talking to one another at the level they should be, because the European countries and Russia and China haven't been able to find a way to help Iran's economy outside of the sanctions of the United States. All those things just build up tension and create a situation where a mistake or miscalculation could create a situation that we don't really need. It would be great if Iran would stop ratcheting up its pressure on us. They apparently feel that they have to do that in response to get attention from the European nations and the other countries that were part of that joint agreement. The United States, of course, under this administration, has taken that as an opportunity to tighten the sanctions and push back. Regime change is not something the United States should be engaged in. They should be engaged in trying to have a conversation to lower the nuclear pressure and risk in this, and to get it to a point where the Iranian people can decide for themselves how they want to be governed and how they want to move forward. It's a serious situation. I don't think that if you ask anybody today, is war imminent? I would say no. Is it a risk that shouldn't exist? I think it's at a much higher risk level than should occur, mostly self-inflicted by this administration through its policies. And we need to get our members of Congress to get on this administration through hearings and through pressure to try to get them back on track and get them back to the negotiating table. And that's the same similar situation with North Korea. It doesn't make any sense to not have a conversation and not be negotiating and using diplomatic channels in either event. That inclination of the president should be encouraged. Now, whether you think he's gone about it the right way or not is certainly different, but in North Korea, where he's made an overture, it's unusual, it's not orthodox, but it's not the wrong inclination. Diplomacy and conversations are the right direction. Whether he's equipped and his administration have enough personnel with experience in place and the inclination to use those channels to get to an agreement that's going to take a while, instead of having staged hearings one-on-one with the leadership that seem to be more for the cameras and TV than for a solution, that's a different matter on that. So none of this is insoluble. All of it, I think, means having support for our diplomatic channels, for the State Department, for USAID, for our military-to-military engagement, and keep it moving in that direction. And that's what we fight for every day with your help. We really appreciate all the support that you've given the Council for a Livable World. As I said, it's made an impact. We've changed the House now. It is to me what we can get through the House. We have an opportunity, a tough one, in the Senate but we are going to be fighting like crazy to see if we can do that, because what a difference it would make in this world to have progressive leadership in the House and the Senate, be able to push back on some of these far from progressive policies that this administration otherwise seems to want to pursue. So thank you for your support. Please keep doing that. Support us. Obviously, we need your help, but support the candidates through us so that we can get that kind of a livable world back in action. And we look forward to staying in touch with you through all of our various sources on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, by email, snail mail even. And we're happy to hear from you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.